welcome to Art with Ian. Today we are talking about edges in our art. Now I want to keep it pretty simple here and just talk about, break it down into the three types I think we really need to be paying attention to in our work, and that is hard, soft, and textured. So hard, basically you can refer to them as found, or you'll see them referred to as found edges, and this is where you're trying to get your viewer to look in this place. Wherever you're putting hard edges, you want the viewer to see that place. So, keep that in mind. It's great for your focal point, for example. Soft is lost. These are, gradual gradated edges. Great for losing an edge in the silhouette or transitioning, from maybe the jawline to the neck in shadow, those kinds of things. And then textured is basically like your painterly stylized. It's kind of what makes you uniquely your style. How does your brush stroke look? What's the texture in the brushes you choose, and that kind of thing. So found equals focus, lost is areas of rest, and painterly is interest, right? So texture is interesting. Put that interest in your focal points, and the nice thing is that areas of light cast the most hard shadow, and so you're going to get that contrast, and in that area you can put a lot of texture because you have the light is what defines the form we see. Light defines the form we see. So texture is great for creating interest, and the area of light fall off into shadow tends to be a really nice place where the light's not too washed out, or the light's not washing out the subject, and it's also not so deep into shadow that you start losing contrast. So let's look at some examples here. So here's a hard edge. It is what it sounds like, a very hard edge. Soft is a nice transition point, and then textured we get there's interest. It kind of looks like a brush stroke, right? There's some painterly your voice, your style in the stroke. So if we look here at these three shapes, these three spheres, if we apply like a soft edge to this middle sphere, we get a nice blended look. It has dimension, but what we lose is the immediate striking graphic appeal of just two values, dark and light. Very, very grabby, right? And then if we go to the third one and we add texture, so now we're getting a similar thing happening where we define the form, but we're defining the form with texture and interest. So both of these, both this one and this one have their purpose, right? They have a purpose. If you're trying to make something that looks like a pool ball, for example, you're going to want to render it with a very soft edge. Whereas if you're trying to, let's say, do a piece of fruit or an old man's face, flesh, skin, kind of a thing, you're going to want texture. You'll never sell age in a human portrait without texture, because young people have soft skin. So really important to understand how each of these works and why we use them. And certainly the most important thing is that we know what the graphic shape is before we start messing with edges. I can't stress enough how important this is. So if we haven't established a good piece just graphically, then edges will never save it. That just like it's detail, basically, just like any detail, you can detail a crappy composition all you want and it will never be good. So edges, they come much later in the process than the plotting and getting everything worked out phase. So let's look at a couple of my paintings for examples here. First, let's look at this one of the pirate, the skeleton pirate. Now you can see the clear and obvious focal point is right here. And the way that I've made sure that it is the focal point is by putting the fire right next to it. And by doing so, I've given myself an opportunity to put the brightest light where I want it and cast the hard shadows against that bright light. We get this really, really clear and obvious focal point. It is the most interesting thing to look at in the painting. I've also backlit it because it is a bit graphic. It's not, super realism or anything. So I've backlit it to give myself the opportunity to define some edges, to define some shape and form on the shadow side. But you can still tell how much softer things are in the shadow. And that is super essential. In shadow, there's a lack of light, obviously. And without that light, there's no way to create the contrast that you see in areas of light. Therefore, if you want a shadow to feel believable, you have to soften the edge. All of the edges inside shadow space, inside your shadow shapes, need to be much softer than the ones in light. Okay, let's look over here at Einstein. Now you can see what I was talking about with that transition from light to shadow, how we get the most texture along this edge here. And then as soon as it falls fully into shadow, we no longer have that light to play with. We no longer have a way to show the form the same way we did in the light. So it needs to, basically all this texture needs to really, really calm down. It's not like it goes away in the shadow, there's just no light to define it. Except for the bounce light and stuff around the room. Let's say if you're near a wall and the light is hitting that wall really hard, that light will bounce and define some of the features or forms within the shadow. Now it's really important to make an image read, like I was mentioning, to make it read without all the edges and all of the value, all the value changes and all of that detail and stuff. So what I've done here is I've set up a little filter for these two paintings so we can look at them in two values, black and white. And we can still tell what they are. Had we never seen them the other way, and we saw them for the first time this way, we would still basically know what they are. I think you probably wouldn't guess that this is a torch. But outside that, we basically know what we're seeing here. So that is super important to establish, set up a good graphic image before you go any further. And then lastly, before we wrap this up, let's just talk a little bit about brushes and how they affect edge. A hard round brush, that's crisp, super crisp. An airbrush, you see how soft that is? And then a texture brush. Let's get something with some texture. This will do. So you can see here that how different basically our work is going to be, or our edges are going to be, based on what brush we use. Just with these three brushes alone, it's clear and obvious how different the edge would be. Now, you may have heard this before if you've watched other art videos. This airbrush, be super careful when and how you use the airbrush. If you're trying to define an edge, like a silhouette or something in focus, you really want to be careful with using the airbrush. Don't be afraid to get in there with a hard edge and really establish those shapes. You can always soften later with a soft eraser, or get in there and do little bits with an airbrush later to create halftones, but try to be brave. And I know it's hard to paint with like a regular old hard round brush. I know it's hard to paint with something like this, but try to be brave and be okay with it looking kind of bad at first, and not bad, but just be okay with it looking graphic and being kind of basic feeling, like a couple of tone. You're working in maybe 3 to 5 values with just hard brushes. And if you can establish a good look for your whatever it is you're painting that way, then coming in and doing edge treatments is just going to be a breeze, and you're not going to be fighting the design while you do an edge treatment to the work. So anyways, that's pretty much going to wrap it up. Short recap, we use hard edges for focal points in areas of bright light. We use soft edges for shadows and areas of low contrast. We use textured edges to basically have a personal voice and style in our work. And that's basically how edges are used, at least in my work, and that, you know, others might say differently, but that's the way I see edges as a tool in our artwork. So anyways, if you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, subscribe to the channel, ring the bell for notifications of future videos, and I will see you guys in the next one. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe, share it with your friends, ring the bell for notifications of future videos, and I'll see you guys in the next one.